The wind howled through Chicago's Union Station, carrying with it the sharp bite of a late February blizzard. Snowflakes swirled against the towering glass windows, blurring the world outside into a chaotic white haze. Inside, the Grand Hall buzzed with the restless energy of stranded travelers, businessmen tapping impatiently at their phones, families huddled over suitcases, and tourists snapping photos of the iconic marble pillars. Amid the crowd, Eleanor Vance stood out like a beacon, her tailored navy coat and sleek blonde bun a stark contrast to the disheveled chaos around her. At 37, she was the COO of Nextech Solutions, a rising star in the tech world known for her razor-sharp intellect and unshakable composure. Her presence commanded attention, but today her polished exterior hid a storm of its own. She stood near a coffee kiosk, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice low but strained. "Charles, I said no. The merger terms are unacceptable. I won't sign off on something that compromises our core values." Her words were clipped professional, but her free hand clenched into a fist, betraying the tension coursing through her. Charles Ramsey, her business partner and the company's CEO, loomed a few feet away. His expensive suit wrinkled from travel. His face was flushed, his eyes narrowed with a fury that made the air between them crackle. "Eleanor, you're not thinking straight," he hissed, stepping closer, his voice barely audible over the hum of the crowd. "This deal is our future. You don't get to play moral high ground when billions are on the line." He grabbed her arm, his grip tight enough to make her wince. Eleanor's breath caught her confident facade cracking as she tried to pull away. "Let go of me, Charles," she said, her voice trembling now, no longer the commanding tone she used in boardrooms. He didn't release her. Instead, he leaned in, his words venomous. "You think you can walk away from this? From me, you're nothing without this company, Eleanor. Nothing." The words hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she froze, her heart pounding as memories of years under his manipulative control flooded back late-night threats disguised as strategy sessions, ultimatums framed as mentorship, and the constant pressure to prove her worth in a world that demanded perfection. The crowd around them began to notice. Phones came out recording the scene as if it were a spectacle, rather than a woman in distress. Whispers rippled through the onlookers, but no one moved to intervene. Eleanor's eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but the sea of faces offered no help, only cold curiosity. Her shoulder ached where Charles's fingers dug in, and for the first time in years, she felt small, powerless, like the girl who'd once cowered under her father's expectations. "Please, Charles, don't do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm already hurt." The admission slipped out raw and unguarded, a plea from someone who'd spent her life hiding vulnerability. Charles's grip tightened, his face twisting into a sneer. "Hurt? You don't know what hurt is, but you will if you don't fall in line." That's when Michael Harper saw her. He was just another face in the crowd, a 40-year-old plumber in a worn flannel shirt, his calloused hands gripping a duffel bag and the small hand of his 9-year-old son, Liam. Michael was no stranger to chaos. He'd been a firefighter for a decade before a knee injury forced him into a quieter life. Now he fixed pipes, raised Liam alone, and avoided trouble whenever he could. But something about the scene unfolding before him stirred a familiar instinct, the same one that had once driven him into burning buildings. Liam tugged at his sleeve, his brown eyes wide with concern. "Dad, why's that man yelling at her?" She looked scared. Michael's jaw tightened as he took in Eleanor's pale face, the way her shoulders hunched under Charles's grip. "Stay here for a second, buddy," he said, setting his duffel bag down and handing Liam his phone. Don't move." Michael wove through the crowd, his broad frame parting the onlookers like a ship through waves. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He didn't need to. His presence was enough, steady, unyielding, like a man who'd faced worse than an angry executive and walked away unscathed. "Hey," he said, his voice calm but firm, stopping a few feet from Charles. "Let her go! Now!" Charles turned, sizing Michael up with a dismissive glance. "This doesn't concern you, pal. Move along." Michael didn't flinch. He stepped closer, his eyes locked on Charles's. "I'm not asking. Let her go or we're gonna have a problem." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of someone who meant every syllable. Charles hesitated, his grip loosening slightly as he registered the resolve in Michael's stance. The crowd held its breath, phones still recording, but the air had shifted. Charles released Eleanor's arm, stepping back with a forced laugh. "Fine. She's not worth the trouble." He shot Eleanor a final glare before turning and disappearing into the crowd. Eleanor stumbled back, clutching her arm, her breath coming in short, shaky gasps. Michael caught her elbow, gently steadying her. "You okay?" he asked, his voice softer now, the edge replaced by concern. She nodded, though her eyes were glassy, and she couldn't meet his gaze. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible over the station's din. Michael glanced back at Liam, who was watching with wide eyes, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "Come on," Michael said to Eleanor. "You don't need to stay here with all these people staring. There's a storm coming in, and the trains are delayed. You got somewhere safe to go." Eleanor shook her head, her mind still reeling. Her hotel was across town, and the idea of facing the blizzard or Charles again felt overwhelming. "Not really," she admitted, her voice small. Michael hesitated, then made a decision. "My place isn't far. You can wait out the storm, there, get your bearings. My kid's with me, so you'll be safe. No strings attached." Eleanor looked at him, searching for any hint of ulterior motive, but his face was open, honest, the kind of face you'd trust in a crisis. She nodded, too exhausted to argue. "Okay, thank you." Michael picked up his duffel bag, took Liam's hand, and led the way toward the exit. Eleanor trailing behind, her designer heels clicking unevenly on the marble floor. The crowd parted for them, some still filming, others whispering, but Michael didn't seem to notice. His focus was on getting them out of the station and into the safety of the storm. Outside, the blizzard had worsened, the wind whipping snow into their faces as they made their way to Michael's beat-up pickup truck. Liam climbed into the back seat, chattering about the snow, while Eleanor slid into the passenger side, her coat now damp and clinging to her frame. Michael cranked the heater, and the truck rumbled to life, its tires crunching through the snow as they left the station behind. "I'm Michael, by the way," he said, glancing at her. "This is Liam." The boy leaned forward, his face bright despite the tension. "Hi, do you like plants? I have a whole garden at home. Well, it's mostly herbs, but Dad says they count." Eleanor managed a weak smile, caught off guard by the boy's warmth. "I'm Eleanor. I don't know much about plants, but I'd like to see them." Liam beamed, launching into a detailed explanation of basil versus rosemary, his voice a welcome distraction from the ache in Eleanor's arm and the weight in her chest. The drive to Michael's house took 20 minutes, the city fading into quiet, snow-covered suburbs. His home was a small, single-story bungalow, its porch sagging slightly, but adorned with string lights that glowed faintly through the storm. Inside, the air was warm, smelling faintly of cedar and fresh bread. The living room was cluttered but cozy, with a worn couch, a coffee table covered in Liam's science books, and shelves lined with small pots of herbs, basil thyme, mint, each labeled in a child's careful handwriting. Eleanor stood in the doorway, feeling out of place in her pristine coat, like a visitor from another world. Michael set his duffel bag down and gestured to the couch. "Make yourself at home. I'll get some tea going. You want anything for that arm? Looks like it might bruise." Eleanor touched her arm, wincing slightly. "Maybe some ice, if you have it." Michael nodded, heading to the kitchen while Liam tugged at Eleanor's sleeve. "Want to see my favorite plant?" "It's a lavender. Dad says it's good for calming down." Eleanor followed Liam to a corner of the room where a small lavender plant sat in a clay pot, its purple buds vibrant against the snowy window. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice catching, as she realized how long it had been since she'd noticed something so simple. Liam grinned, pulling a small wooden box from a shelf. "This is my plant journal. I write down what they need, water, sun, stuff like that. Dad says plants are like people. They need care to grow." He opened the box, revealing pages filled with crayon drawings of plants and careful notes. "This one's for you," he said, handing her a tiny pot with a single sprig of mint. "Mint's tough. It grows even when things get hard. I think you're tough too." Eleanor stared at the pot, her throat tightening. She wasn't used to kindness without strings to a child, seeing her not as a corporate titan, but as someone who needed care. Michael returned with the mug of chamomile tea and a bag of frozen peas wrapped in a dish towel. "Best I've got for ice," he said, handing her the makeshift pack. "Sit down, take a breather. You don't have to talk if you don't want to." Eleanor sank onto the couch, pressing the peas to her arm. The cold stung, but it grounded her, pulling her back from the edge of panic. She watched Michael move around the kitchen, his movements steady and practiced, like someone who'd learned to keep things together, even when the world fell apart. Liam sat cross-legged on the floor, flipping through his plant journal, occasionally glancing at Eleanor with a shy smile. "You don't have to stay here," Michael said, leaning against the counter. "But the storm's bad, and I'd rather you didn't go out there alone. Not after what happened." Eleanor sipped the tea, its warmth spreading through her chest. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't even know me." Michael shrugged, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Didn't need to. You were in trouble. That's enough." His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Eleanor's eyes sting. She'd spent her life surrounded by people who weighed her worth in stock options and quarterly reports. This man, a stranger, had seen her at her lowest and acted without hesitation. "Thank you," she said again, her voice steadier now. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't—" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Liam piped up from the floor. "Dad's good at helping people. He used to save people from fires, but now he fixes pipes. He says it's all about making things work again." Michael chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Liam, don't make me sound like a superhero. I'm just a guy doing his job." But Eleanor saw the pride in Liam's eyes, the way he looked at his father like he was the strongest person in the world. She envied that certainty, that unshakable trust. Her own world felt like it was crumbling Charles's threats. The merger, the looming specter of a marriage she didn't want all orchestrated to keep her in line. For years, she'd played the game, climbed the ladder, convinced herself it was worth it. But now, sitting in this small, warm house, she wasn't so sure. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows, but inside the bungalow felt like a sanctuary. Michael started pulling ingredients from the fridge: eggs, cheese, a loaf of bread. "You hungry?" he asked, glancing at Eleanor. "I'm no chef, but I can make a mean grilled cheese. Liam's favorite." Liam nodded enthusiastically. "Dad puts extra cheese. It's the best." Eleanor smiled, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "That sounds nice," she said, surprising herself. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten something homemade, something not delivered by a catering service or ordered in a restaurant. Michael nodded, turning on the stove while Liam pulled out a coloring book and slid it toward Eleanor. "You can color with me if you want. It's okay if you're not good at it. I'm not either, but it's fun." Eleanor hesitated, then picked up a crayon, her manicured nails looking out of place against the bright green stick. She traced the outline of a tree, her movements slow and deliberate, as Liam chattered about his favorite plants and how he wanted to grow a whole forest someday. Michael glanced over from the kitchen, a small smile tugging at his lips. For the first time in hours, Eleanor felt her heartbeat slow, the panic receding like the tide. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow, whether Charles would come after her, whether the company would survive without her, whether she could face the life she'd built. But for now, in this small house, with a kind stranger and his curious son, she felt something she hadn't in years safe. As the smell of grilled cheese filled the air, Liam held up his coloring book, showing off a half-finished picture of a garden. "This is going to be our backyard one day," he said proudly. "Dad says we can plant anything we want as long as we take care of it." Eleanor looked at the drawing, at the bright swirls of green and yellow, and felt a pang of longing for something she couldn't name. "It's beautiful, Liam," she said, her voice soft. "You're gonna make it real someday." And as she spoke, she wondered if she too could make something real. Something that wasn't built on ambition or fear, but on care. Like the mint sprig Liam had given her, tough enough to grow even in the hardest times. The snow had stopped falling by the time Eleanor Vance woke on Michael Harper's couch, but the world outside remained cloaked in a heavy white silence. Sunlight filtered through the bungalow's frost-etched windows, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor, where Liam's coloring books lay scattered. Eleanor blinked, disoriented, the ache in her arm, a dull reminder of the previous day's confrontation at Union Station. The navy coat she'd worn like armor was draped over a chair, its hem still damp from the blizzard. She sat up the couch, creaking under her, and took in the small living room. It was modest, almost cramped by her standards. Her downtown condo could have swallowed this space whole. But every corner held traces of life. A shelf of mismatched mugs, a stack of science magazines, and rows of potted herbs that filled the air with a faint, earthy scent. She clutched the small mint plant Liam had given her, its pot resting on the coffee table, and felt an unfamiliar warmth in her chest. For years, her life had been a series of sterile boardrooms and luxury hotels. This cluttered, lived-in space felt like stepping into a world she'd only read about. Michael was already in the kitchen, the clink of dishes and the soft hum of a kettle pulling her from her thoughts. He wore a faded gray sweatshirt, his dark hair slightly mussed, and moved with the quiet efficiency of someone used to early mornings. Liam sat at the kitchen table, his legs swinging as he scribbled in his plant journal, a half-eaten bowl of cereal beside him. "Morning," he called, spotting Eleanor. "Did you sleep okay? Dad says the couch is lumpy, but I think it's cozy." Eleanor managed a small smile, smoothing her wrinkled blouse. "It was fine, Liam. Thank you." Her voice felt rusty, unaccustomed to softness. She glanced at Michael, who was pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "You didn't have to let me stay," she said, standing and folding the blanket she'd slept under, a knitted thing, green and soft, that smelled faintly of cedar. Michael shrugged, handing her the mug. "Didn't have to, but I wanted to. Coffee's black, but I've got cream if you want it." She took the mug, her fingers brushing his, and nodded. "Black's fine." The kitchen was small, barely big enough for the three of them, but it was warm, the kind of warmth that seeped into your bones. A window above the sink overlooked a snow-covered backyard, where a small wooden bench sat, surrounded by pots of dormant plants, their labels poking through the frost. Eleanor sipped the coffee, its bitterness grounding her, and watched Liam flip through his journal. "This is my rosemary," he said, pointing to a drawing of a spiky plant. "It's grumpy in winter, but Dad says it'll perk up in spring." "You gotta talk to it, though. Plants like it when you tell them stuff." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, amused despite herself. "What do you tell them?" Liam thought, for a moment his face serious. "I tell them about school, or how Dad burned the toast again, or what I want to be when I grow up. Plants are good listeners. They don't interrupt." Michael chuckled from the counter where he was slicing apples. "He's got a point. Plants don't argue back like clients do." Eleanor set her mug down, her fingers tracing the edge of the mint pot. "I don't think I've ever talked to a plant before," she admitted. Liam's eyes widened as if she'd confessed to never seeing the sun. "Really, you should try it. It's like talking to a friend, but they don't get mad if you forget their birthday." Eleanor laughed, a small, genuine sound that surprised her. She couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed without calculating its impact. Every smile in her world was strategic, meant to charm or disarm. But here in this tiny kitchen, it felt natural, like breathing. Michael glanced over his eyes, catching hers for a moment, and she saw something there, understanding maybe, or just quiet acceptance. It unnerved her how easily he seemed to see through her polished exterior. "Want to help with breakfast?" Michael asked, breaking the moment. "We're making pancakes. Liam's the boss, though he's got strong opinions about batter." Liam nodded solemnly. "You gotta mix it just right, or they get lumpy. I'll show you." Eleanor hesitated. She hadn't cooked in years. Her meals came from personal chefs or high-end restaurants, meticulously plated and perfectly balanced. The idea of making pancakes felt as foreign as speaking another language. But Liam was already pushing a bowl toward her, a wooden spoon in his hand. "Come on, it's easy. I'll be your teacher." She took the spoon, feeling oddly exposed, without her usual armor of confidence. "All right," she said, "but don't laugh if I mess this up." Liam grinned. "No promises." As they mixed flour and eggs, Liam chattering about the perfect flip technique, Eleanor felt the tension in her shoulders begin to unravel. The kitchen filled with the sweet smell of batter, and Michael moved around them, setting out plates and pouring more coffee. It was mundane, almost absurdly so, but it was the first time in years Eleanor hadn't felt like she was performing. At Nextech, every move was scrutinized, her decisions, her appearance, her tone. Charles had made sure of that, his guidance a constant reminder that her position depended on his approval. She thought of his grip on her arm, his hissed threats, and her stomach twisted. "You okay, Michael?" asked his voice low, as he noticed her pause, the spoon still in her hand. She nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Just thinking." He didn't push, just handed her a spatula. "Focus on the pancakes. They don't like being ignored." The first pancake was a disaster, lopsided, half-cooked, and stuck to the pan. Liam giggled, poking at it with a fork. "It's a pancake monster! We'll eat it anyway." Eleanor laughed again, the sound freer this time, and tried again. By the third pancake, she'd gotten the hang of it, flipping it, with a clumsy but triumphant flick. Liam clapped, his enthusiasm infectious. "You're a natural, Dad. She's better than you already." Michael raised his hands in mock surrender. "I'm not arguing with the boss." They sat down to eat, the table crowded with plates of uneven pancakes, a jar of maple syrup, and Liam's ever-present plant journal. Eleanor took a bite, the sweetness surprising her. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that made it better than any gourmet dish she'd ever tasted. As they ate, Liam launched into a story about his school's science fair, where he'd won second place for a project on hydroponics. "I'm gonna grow food for the whole city one day," he declared, his mouth full of pancake. like tomatoes and lettuce, and maybe even strawberries. Eleanor listened, her heart aching at his unguarded ambition. She'd once had dreams like that, before they were buried under corporate ladders and shareholder expectations. "That's a big plan," she said. "What made you pick plants?" Liam shrugged, his answer simple but profound. "They make people happy. Like when Dad's sad, he sits with the herbs and it's like they fix him a little." Michael looked down at his plate, his expression unreadable, and Eleanor sensed a story there, one he wasn't ready to share. She took a breath, her fingers tightening around her mug. "Can I ask you something, Michael?" He looked up, nodding. "Why do you do this? Take in a stranger, let me crash on your couch. Feed me breakfast. You don't owe me anything." Michael leaned back, his eyes steady. "I was a firefighter for 10 years, saw a lot of people at their worst moments. You learn quick that sometimes all someone needs is a safe place to land. You looked like you needed that yesterday." His words were matter-of-fact, but they hit Eleanor like a wave. She'd spent her life building walls, convinced vulnerability was a weakness. Yet, here was a man who saw her fear and didn't judge her for it. Liam, oblivious to the weight of the moment, pushed his journal toward Eleanor. "Want to write something in here? You can tell the mint plant a secret. It's good at keeping them." Eleanor hesitated, then took the crayon. He offered her hand, trembling slightly. She wrote a single line, "I don't know who I am without my job." She didn't show it to Liam, just closed the journal and handed it back. "Thanks," she said softly. "I'll think about what to tell it next time." Liam beamed, satisfied, and ran off to water his plants, leaving Eleanor and Michael alone at the table. The silence was comfortable, but Eleanor's mind was anything but. She thought of Charles, the merger, the marriage he'd been pushing her toward, a strategic alliance with a rival company's heir to secure her position. She'd resisted, but the pressure had been relentless, eroding her sense of self. "I don't know how to do this," she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do what Michael asked, stacking the plates. Be normal. Live like this. My life is meetings, contracts, and people telling me who I'm supposed to be. I don't even know what I want anymore." Michael set the plates down, his expression thoughtful. "You don't have to know right now. You just have to give yourself permission to figure it out. One step at a time." He stood, motioning for her to follow him to the backyard. The snow was deep, but a shoveled path led to a small greenhouse, its glass fogged with condensation. Inside, rows of herbs and seedlings thrived under grow lights, a tiny oasis in the winter chill. "Liam's project," Michael explained. "He started it after we lost his mom. She was a gardener, loved this stuff. It's how he keeps her close." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I'm sorry." How long ago? Michael's jaw tightened, but his voice was steady. 3 years. House fire. I was on duty, couldn't get there in time. Liam was at school, thank God. It's just been us since then." Eleanor nodded, sensing the weight of his loss. "You're doing a good job with him," she said. "He's incredible." Michael smiled, a rare, unguarded expression. "He's the best thing I've got." They spent the morning in the greenhouse, Liam showing Eleanor how to check soil moisture and trim dead leaves. "You gotta be gentle," he said, handing her a pair of tiny scissors. "Plants don't like it when you're rough." Eleanor followed his instructions, her movements careful, almost reverent. She thought of her own life, how she'd been rough with herself, pushing through exhaustion and doubt to meet impossible standards. For the first time, she wondered what it would be like to be gentle, to tend to herself the way Liam tended to his plants. By afternoon, the roads were cleared, and Eleanor knew she could leave. Her hotel was waiting, her phone buzzing with missed calls from Charles and her assistant. But the thought of returning to that world cold, calculated and lonely, made her stomach churn. "You don't have to decide anything today," Michael said as if reading her mind. "Stay for lunch. Liam's been planning to show you his basil experiment." Eleanor nodded, grateful for the excuse to stay a little longer. As they headed back inside, Liam tugging at her hand, she felt something shift inside her, a small fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to grow too. The Chicago sky was a pale, washed-out gray, the kind that promised more snow, but held off as if giving the city a moment to breathe. Inside Michael Harper's bungalow, the air was warm, filled with the scent of fresh coffee, and the faint tang of potting soil from Liam's latest greenhouse experiment. Eleanor Vance sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, but untouched its screen, glowing with unread emails from Nextech's board, and her assistant, each one a reminder of the life she'd left behind at Union Station 3 days ago. Her navy coat hung on a hook by the door, its pristine lines now softened by a faint dusting of flour from yesterday's baking session with Liam. She wore one of Michael's old sweatshirts, the sleeves too long, and a pair of borrowed socks, her designer heels tucked away in a corner. The bruise on her arm had faded to a dull yellow, but the memory of Charles Ramsey's grip and his threats still lingered sharp as the winter wind. Liam burst into the kitchen, his sneakers squeaking on the hardwood, a small notebook clutched in his hands. "Eleanor, look! I wrote down how to make the mint grow faster. You gotta mist it, not drown it. Wanna try?" He held out a spray bottle, his eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm only a 9-year-old could muster. Eleanor smiled, closing her laptop. "Sure, let's give it a shot." She followed him to the living room where the mint plant he'd given her sat on a windowsill, its green leaves catching the weak sunlight. As she misted the plant, Liam chattered about soil pH and sunlight, angles his words a mix of science and childlike wonder. "You're like a plant doctor," she said, ruffling his hair. He grinned, puffing out his chest. "Yup, Dad says I could be a botanist someday. Or maybe a chef 'cause I'm good at herbs." Michael, leaning against the kitchen doorway, chuckled. "You're good at eating herbs, kid." Jury's still out on the cooking. The moment felt light, almost fragile, like a bubble that could burst with a single wrong move. Eleanor had spent the last 3 days in this house helping with dishes, coloring with Liam, and learning the quiet rhythm of their life. It was a rhythm she'd never known, unhurried, unpolished, rooted in small acts of care. But the outside world hadn't forgotten her. Her phone silenced, but persistent buzzed with messages from Charles, her assistant, and even her mother, each one urging her to return to Nextech, to the merger, to the marriage that would cement her place in the corporate elite. She'd ignored them all, but the weight of their expectations pressed against her, threatening to crack the peace she'd found here. Michael noticed her distraction. "You don't have to check those," he said, nodding toward her phone. "Not unless you're ready." Eleanor sighed, setting the spray bottle down. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready. They want me back for a board meeting tomorrow. The merger's falling apart without me and Charles. He's not going to let this go." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly, betraying the fear she'd been trying to bury. Michael pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his expression calm, but focused, like he was assessing a broken pipe. "What do you want, Eleanor? Not them, not the company, you." The question caught her off guard. She'd spent her career making decisions based on strategy, not desire. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've never had the luxury of wanting something for myself." Liam, oblivious to the tension, tugged at her sleeve. "Come see the greenhouse again. I found a new sprout." Eleanor let him lead her outside, grateful for the distraction. The greenhouse was a sanctuary of green, its air humid and alive with the scent of earth. Liam pointed to a tiny seedling in a clay pot, its leaves barely visible. This one's basil. It's shy, but it'll grow if you're patient. Eleanor knelt beside him, her fingers brushing the soil. How do you know it'll grow? She asked. Liam shrugged, his answer simple but profound. Because it's trying. That's what plants do. They keep going, even when it's hard. Eleanor felt a lump in her throat. She had been trying to please Charles, the board, her family, but for what? A title. A paycheck. She looked at Liam, his face lit with hope, and envied his certainty. Back inside, Michael was chopping vegetables for lunch, his movements steady and practiced. Liam's got you hooked on plants already, he said, glancing up with a half-smile. He's got a way of making you see things differently. Eleanor nodded, sitting at the counter. He's special. You both are. I don't know how you do it. Raise him, keep this place going, stay so grounded. Michael set the knife down, his eyes meeting hers. It's not always easy. After Claire, my wife, died, I thought I'd never figure it out. She was the one who held us together. But Liam, he's my anchor. Every day I get up for him. That's enough to keep going. Eleanor swallowed her chest tight. What was she like? Michael's face softened, a rare glimpse of vulnerability. She was fierce. Loved plants like Liam. Loved helping people. She'd have liked you, someone who's been through the ringer but keeps fighting. The conversation was cut short by a sharp knock at the door. Eleanor froze, her heart racing. Michael wiped his hands on a dish towel and opened the door, revealing Charles Ramsey, flanked by two men in crisp suits, lawyers by the look of them. Charles's eyes locked on Eleanor, his smile cold and calculated. Eleanor, you've had your little break. Time to come back to reality. Michael stepped forward, his body a quiet barrier between Charles and the room. She's not going anywhere. She doesn't want to. You've got something to say it here. Charles's smile didn't waver, but his eyes narrowed. This doesn't concern you, plumber. Eleanor, the board meeting is tomorrow. The merger depends on you. If you don't show, you're throwing away everything you've built. And for what? This. He gestured at the bungalow, his tone dripping with disdain. Eleanor stood, her hands clenched at her sides. I'm not your property, Charles. I don't owe you anything. Her voice was steady, but inside she was trembling. Charles laughed, a sharp, cutting sound. You think you can just walk away? You're nothing without Nextech, nothing without me. And that marriage to Harrison, it's not optional. It's the price of your seat at the table. The lawyers stepped forward, one of them pulling out a stack of documents. Ms. Vance, your absence constitutes a breach of fiduciary duty. We can make this very difficult for you. Eleanor's breath hitched, the weight of their words pressing down on her. She'd spent years building her career, sacrificing everything, friendships, family, herself, to reach the top. Could she really let it all go? Liam, who had been watching from the greenhouse doorway, ran to Eleanor's side, clutching his notebook. Don't let them make you sad again, he whispered, his voice fierce. You're like my mint plant. You're tough. Eleanor looked down at him, his small hand gripping hers, and something inside her shifted. She thought of the seedling in the greenhouse, small but stubborn, pushing through the soil. She thought of Michael, steady and unyielding, standing between her and Charles. And she thought of herself, not the COO, not the polished executive, but the woman who'd laughed over burnt pancakes and misted a mint plant with care. I'm done, she said, her voice clear and firm. I resign. Effective immediately. You can have the merger, the company, all of it. I'm choosing something else. Charles's face twisted with rage. "You're making a mistake, Eleanor. You'll regret this." He turned to the lawyers, barking orders to prepare legal action, then stormed out the door, slamming behind him. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Liam's soft voice. "You're staying, right?" Eleanor knelt beside him, her eyes stinging. "For now, yeah, I want to see that basil grow." Liam grinned, hugging her tightly, and Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't known she could feel. Michael watched them, his expression unreadable but soft. "You sure about this?" he asked once Liam had run off to check his plants. Eleanor nodded, her heart pounding but certain. "I've never been surer of anything. I don't know what's next, but I know I can't go back to that." That afternoon, Eleanor made a call not to her assistant or the board, but to a local community center she'd found online. They were looking for volunteers to teach job skills to at-risk teens, and something about it called to her. She spent the rest of the day researching her laptop, now filled with notes on resume workshops and vocational training instead of corporate spreadsheets. Michael helped her brainstorm, offering practical advice from his years as a firefighter and plumber. "Kids like that need someone who believes in them," he said. "You've got the skills to make a difference. You just have to show up." Eleanor nodded, feeling a spark of purpose she hadn't felt in years. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over the greenhouse, Liam handed Eleanor a small notebook, its pages filled with his careful handwriting. "This is for you," he said. "It's got all my plant tips. You can add your own, too. Like how to be tough like mint." Eleanor flipped through the pages, her eyes landing on a drawing of a mint plant, with the words "strong," even in hard times, written beside it. She hugged Liam, her voice thick. "Thank you, Liam. This means more than you know." Later, as they sat down to dinner, spaghetti with fresh basil from the greenhouse, Eleanor felt a quiet strength growing inside her. She'd walked away from everything she'd known, but in this small house, with a man who'd faced fire and a boy who believed in plants, she was beginning to find something new herself. 6 months had passed since Eleanor Vance walked away from her life as Nextech's COO, and the Chicago summer was in full bloom, the air thick with the scent of cut grass and blooming flowers. Eleanor's new apartment, a modest one-bedroom 3 blocks from Michael Harper's bungalow, was a far cry from her downtown condo, but it felt like hers in a way no penthouse ever had. The walls were lined with Liam's drawings, bright sketches of plants and gardens, and a small mint plant sat on her windowsill, thriving under her careful attention. She'd traded her tailored suits for jeans and simple blouses, her days now spent at the Lincoln Park Community Center, where she led job skills workshops for at-risk teens. The work was exhausting, often heartbreaking, but it filled a part of her she hadn't known was empty. Today, she stood in the center's courtyard, surrounded by raised garden beds that she, Michael, and Liam had built over the spring. The beds were bursting with vegetables and herbs, a testament to Liam's vision and their shared effort. Eleanor wiped sweat from her brow, her hands dusted with soil, and smiled as Liam ran over a watering can in his hands. "Eleanor, the tomatoes are huge. Look," he shouted, pointing to a cluster of ripe fruit. "We're gonna make the best salsa ever." Eleanor laughed, ruffling his hair. "You're the boss, Liam. Just tell me when to start chopping." Michael stood nearby, hammering stakes into the ground to support a trellis for climbing beans. His flannel shirt was rolled up to his elbows, and he moved with the same steady focus Eleanor had come to admire. Their lives had woven together over the months, a rhythm of shared meals, late-night talks, and weekend gardening projects. Eleanor wasn't living with them. She'd insisted on her own space, needing to prove she could stand on her own, but she was at their house most evenings, helping Liam with homework or cooking dinner with Michael. It was a life she'd never imagined, one where happiness wasn't measured in stock options or boardroom victories, but in small, tangible moments, the taste of fresh basil, the sound of Liam's laughter, the quiet comfort of Michael's presence. Inside the community center, Eleanor's workshops were gaining traction. She'd used her business acumen to design programs that taught teens everything from resume writing to basic carpentry skills they could use to build a future. One of her students, a 16-year-old named Jamal, had just landed an apprenticeship at a local mechanic shop, and his grateful smile had stayed with Eleanor all week. She'd never felt this kind of pride before, not the polished pride of closing a deal, but something deeper, rawer, rooted in the knowledge that she'd made a difference. Yet, the past still lingered. Charles Ramsey had sent a cease and desist letter last month, claiming she'd violated a non-compete clause by working at the center. Her mother had called at her voice dripping with disappointment, urging Eleanor to come to her senses. And yesterday, an unexpected visitor had arrived, Amanda Klein-Nextex, head of HR, offering Eleanor her old job back, with a 20% pay increase and a corner office. "The board's a mess without you," Amanda had said, her tone almost pleading. "Charles is losing control. We need you, Eleanor." Eleanor had listened politely, then declined, her voice firm but calm. "I'm where I need to be," she'd said, and meant it. Now, as she knelt beside Liam in the garden, showing him how to prune basil without damaging the stems, she felt the weight of that decision settle into something solid, certain. Liam handed her a pair of tiny scissors, his face serious. "You gotta cut just above the little leaves like this. Dad says it's like giving the plant a haircut." Eleanor followed his instructions, her movements careful, almost reverent. "You're a good teacher, Liam," she said, and he beamed, his smile brighter than the summer sun. Michael joined them, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You two are gonna have this place looking like a farm soon," he said, his voice warm with pride. "The kids at the center love it. Jamal was out here yesterday talking about starting a community market." Eleanor's heart swelled. "That's his idea." He didn't tell me." Michael shrugged, a teasing glint in his eyes. "Guess he trusts you enough to steal your thunder." They worked until the sun began to dip, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Liam ran off to draw a map of the garden, leaving Eleanor and Michael alone by the trellis. She leaned against a wooden post, her hands still dusted with soil. "I got a letter today," she said, her voice quiet. "From Jamal's mom. She said he's never been this focused before, that he talks about the center all the time." She thanked me. Michael nodded, his expression soft. "You're doing good work, Eleanor. Real work. Not the kind that makes headlines, but the kind that matters." She looked down at her hands, the manicured nails long gone, replaced by calluses and dirt. "I used to think mattering meant power money. Now I'm not so sure." Before Michael could respond, Liam came running back, a large sheet of paper flapping in his hands. "I finished it," he announced, spreading the drawing on the ground. It was a vibrant sketch of the community garden with 3 stick figures standing in the center, Michael, Liam, and Eleanor, each holding a different plant. Above them, in Liam's careful handwriting, were the words, "My family grows." Eleanor's throat tightened, her eyes stinging as she traced the figures with her finger. "This is us," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Liam nodded, his eyes bright. "Yup, you're the lavender, 'cause you're calming like Dad says. I'm the basil, 'cause I'm zesty. And Dad's the rosemary, 'cause he's strong." Eleanor laughed, wiping her eyes. "It's perfect, Liam. Absolutely perfect." That evening they ate dinner at Michael's house, the table crowded with plates of grilled vegetables from the garden and homemade bread. Liam chattered about his dream of opening a plant shop, while Eleanor and Michael listened, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed dishes. After dinner, Liam fell asleep on the couch, his drawing tucked beside him. Eleanor and Michael moved to the small backyard where the summer air was warm and the stars peeked through the city haze. They sat on the wooden bench, the one Michael had built with Liam's help, and Eleanor felt a quiet peace settle over her. "I keep thinking about what you said," she began, her voice soft, "about figuring out what I want. I think I'm starting to understand it now." Michael turned to her, his eyes steady. "What's that?" Eleanor took a breath, her fingers tracing the edge of the bench. "I want this. Not just you and Liam, though you're a big part of it. I want a life where I can be imperfect, where I can make mistakes and still be enough. I want to help people, like I'm doing at the center. I want to grow things, gardens, relationships myself." She paused, her voice catching. "I want to be someone who chooses love over fear every day." Michael reached for her hand, his touch warm and grounding. "You're already that person, Eleanor. You've been choosing it since the day you walked away from Next-Tech." She smiled, her heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you and Liam. You saw me when I couldn't see myself." They sat in silence for a moment, the crickets filling the air with their soft chorus. Then Michael spoke, his voice low but clear. "Claire, my wife, she used to say that home isn't a place. It's the people you choose, the ones you'd fight for no matter what. You're part of that for us now, Eleanor. You know that, right?" Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't hide them. "I do," she whispered. "And I choose you, too. Both of you." Michael squeezed her hand, and for the first time Eleanor felt truly whole, not because she was perfect, but because she was chosen, flaws and all. The next morning they returned to the community center, where a small crowd had gathered for the garden's official opening. Teens from Eleanor's workshops stood proudly by their raised beds, showing off carrots and zucchini to their families. Jamal handed Eleanor a small wooden plaque. He'd carved the words, "Thank you, Ms. Vance," etched in careful letters. "You believed in me," he said, his voice shy but steady. "Nobody ever did that before." Eleanor hugged him, her heart swelling with a pride that no corporate achievement could match. As she looked around at the teens, the garden, Liam running between the beds with a watering can, and Michael watching her with quiet pride, she realized she was rich in a way she'd never been before. Not in money or status, but in connection, in purpose, in love. Later that week, Eleanor found a photo in Michael's greenhouse tucked behind a pot of rosemary. It showed Claire, Michael's late wife, smiling in a garden, her hands covered in dirt. Liam had told Eleanor that Claire loved teaching people to grow things that she believed plants could heal hearts. Eleanor touched the photo, a quiet gratitude filling her. "Thank you," she whispered, not just to Claire, but to the life that had led her here. She'd lost everything she thought mattered, her title, her wealth, her carefully curated image, but she'd gained something far greater, a family, a purpose, a chance to bloom. The lesson was clear, etched into every moment of her new life. Family isn't where you're born, but where you're chosen, where you choose to show up day after day. Happiness comes not from chasing power, but from nurturing what's real: relationships, community, yourself. As Eleanor watered the lavender in the community garden, Liam's words echoed in her mind. Plants keep going even when it's hard. So could she, and so could anyone if they dared to choose love over fear, to tend to the small, stubborn seeds of hope, and to let them grow.